This is a pretty rough time over in England. The 8th Air Force was right in the middle of some of their tough battles. They were losing, like they lost 69 bombers in one day, believe it or not, 69 bombers.
And so their force became separated and the plan kind of fell apart.
6th of February, we went to a city called Chemnitz, right near Leipzig, and we got shot down on that mission.
It's the idea of these young men having to fight in these conditions, and you take off and it's maybe a 6 or 7 hour mission, flying in, dropping your bombs, flying back. You're exhausted by the time you get back.
So when we got hit, we got separated from our formation. We started losing altitude and they left us alone. So our navigator didn't know where in the hell he was.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers...
General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
December 7th changed the world forever. America's dream of peace had failed. Men and women, young and old, would take up arms and serve their nation. By war's end, over 16 million had worn the uniform. Over 400,000 had given their lives. The average age of an American soldier during World War II was just 26. Bill was only 18 when he joined. This is the first of a 3-part series following his service during the Second World War.
Well, I was born in Lexington, Kentucky in 1924, back in the recession days, and went to high school there. I graduated from the Lexington Latin High School. It was a classical type school, just boys. 50 of us in the school, but 8 in my class. And I graduated in 1940 from high school. And then the war broke out when the Japanese attacked in December '41. Well, I decided, my brother volunteered to, and I was still 17, so I turned 18 the next year in 1942, and so I volunteered to go into the Army Air Force and took a physical and flunked it. I had to have a circumcision. You couldn't go in unless you were circumcised, believe it or not. So at 18 years of age, I had a circumcision, and my entry was delayed. I finally went on active duty on June the 8th of 43, and went down to Keisterfield, Mississippi for my basic training. And in the summer of 43 in Mississippi, pretty hot, June, July, and August. And they shipped us into a college up at Elon College, North Carolina. We stayed there, there's about 50 of us in this unit, studying different items, getting briefed on math and stuff, photography and some astro and so forth. Then we were sent down to Nashville, Tennessee for classification. Now this was to decide whether you're going to be a pilot, a bombardier, or a navigator. And there were 50 of us that went down there, and this happened, and I guess we were there in December of 43. This is a pretty rough time over in England. The 8th Air Force was right in the middle of some of their tough battles. They were losing, like they lost 69 bombers in one day, believe it or not. 69 bombers, 690 men in one day over Berlin, the first raid over Berlin.
Leaving trails of steaming vapor in their wake, United States bombers bound for Berlin to destroy armament industries in and around the Nazi war capital. In their first daylight mission over the heart of Hitler's fortress, American bombers combined with British air forces are pounding Germany with raids around the globe.
The role of air power in the Second World War is a special story in itself, and particularly the role of a strategic bombing campaign. The British were in the war long before America got in. British were in as early as September 1939. As a background to this, remember that London and other major British cities had been bombed mercilessly by the Germans early in the war. America began its bombing campaign, its strategic bombing campaign, with some very meager efforts in the summer and fall of 1942. But by 1943, they had ginned up a fairly significant fighting force of B-17s and B-24s in England, and they were under a lot of pressure to get a campaign started. The British and the Soviets wanted America to get going because they were carrying most of the combat load.
One propeller out, a bomber limps home. In all, 68 American planes failed to return. But the next day and the next, American bombers returned in follow-up raids.
Well, they began to launch missions into the continent, and one of the biggest that they launched happened in 1943, and it was called the Dual Raid. It was two targets, both Regensburg and Schweinfurt in Germany, which were key centers for manufacturing parts that went into airplanes or manufacturing airplanes themselves. And so two forces were launched out of the United Kingdom. One of those forces, the one shown in a green line here, was to bomb Regensburg, and the other was to bomb Schweinfurt. And they were timed initially to be mutually supporting. But what happened was it was a foggy day in England, and they couldn't get off in time, and so their force became separated, and the plan kind of fell apart.
The B-17 suffered the most savage blows since the war began.
Well, they did bomb those, but they suffered tremendous losses. The Regensburg force went on to land in North Africa because it was too far to get back to England. The Schweinfurt force turned around and went all the way back and was fired on or was attacked all the way back. And so they lost a lot of airplanes. And what Schweinfurt Regensburg proved was we didn't have a robust enough bombing force, and we didn't have enough long-range escorts to conduct the kind of bombing campaign that we wanted to conduct.
Well, anyway, they were losing a lot of planes, so instead of becoming pilots, bombardiers, navigators, 42 of us became gunners. Because every time they shot down the B-17 or B-24, they lost 2 pilots, but they lost 5 gunners. So they had to replace the gunners. So most of us ended up in gunnery school. I went to Buckingham Army Air Base, Fort Myers, Florida. After we went through gunnery school, which was, I think, about 6 to 8 weeks, they shipped us across the bay to MacDill Field, which is in Tampa. And that's where the B-17 crews were formed. 10 men. You had 2 pilots, bombardier, navigator, and 5 gunners.
Gunners on B-17s were typically 17 to 20, 21. Pilots tended to be 20 to 23, 24. So think of your college senior, college junior, recent high school graduate. That's the kind of folks who are fighting this air war.
That's where we met our B-17s, and we flew practice missions over the Gulf of Mexico and in that area for a couple of months, getting acquainted with the airplane and formation and so forth. And if you were lucky, you picked up a B-17, you flew it over the Atlantic route over, through Newfoundland and so forth. But we weren't lucky. So they ended up shipping us up to the port of embarkation, Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, waiting for a ship. So finally they had this big transport called the Ile-de-France. It was a French luxury ship before the war, but it wasn't a luxury ship during the war. I don't know how many troops we had on board, but we had a whole Canadian battalion, I know that. And we had a lot of gunners, a lot of air crews were on board. It took us about 10 days to get over to England. Lousy weather, everybody was sick for days on it, including the crew even, they were sick. We docked up there somewhere up in Scotland, I think. And they assigned the air crews were divided. So many of us went to different bomb groups. And I went to the 452nd Bomb Group, which was at Deafham Green. And we did a couple of practice missions. And our pilot had to fly a combat mission with an experienced crew before he could take us over on a mission. And he was shot down on his first mission. But fortunately, it was during the Battle of the Bulge. It was in early December, right around before Christmas.
On December 16th, the triumphant cheers died down in Europe. In the Christmas season of 1944, nobody was predicting that the war would end by Saturday night or a week from Wednesday.
Ardennes was a last gasp orchestrated by Hitler himself, with only limited tactical input from his general staff. It was a gamble that was doomed from the start.
Reserves of men and materiel had been hoarded for the day of counterattack. Under cloudy skies, close-hanging ground mists that defied aerial observation, the very much alive German army gathered its forces in the Forest Isles to strike one strong, decisive blow at the American army.
There were some die-hard generals who were pretty much committed to the Nazi approach and Hitler, who thought maybe they could slow it down enough so they could maybe get peace on that would be more generous to the German side. But people who were independent thinkers, when they saw P-51s and B-17s and B-24s and Lancasters and the other British bombers over Berlin day after day after day after day, I mean, you don't have to be too stupid to figure out, hey, this isn't really going to end well. And the Allies brought their tremendous logistical system, logistical power, and air power to bear. And once those kicked in at full speed, the game was over.
The weather cleared and the Air Force took to the skies to bomb and strafe and fight the rejuvenated Luftwaffe to the ground.
And the net result was Germany exhausted much of its force and much of its capability. So I think you could make a case that it brought the war to an end sooner.
It's one of the worst winters in Europe, that winter of 44, 45. Anyway, they got back to England. And so, but when they came back, we had to recheck again. We had to go up and fly a couple more practice missions, and we started flying combat. My first mission was in January 45.